I think our training method should focus more on the integration of techniques as opposed to the details. That is what we talked about in part 1, and it's a big message that I've been pushing on this channel recently. Partially because I just launched my first online course and I put a huge emphasis on the integration of techniques in there, because there are people that are way more qualified than myself to give you the details. But more importantly, I think John Danaher advocates for this style of training, and I'm just trying to amplify that message.
Most people, when they think about what it takes to become a champion, they're talking about how am I going to refine technique? But even more important than that, once you've got to a sufficient level, then it becomes more of a question of integration. And if you just keep piling away at perfection of techniques without integration, you tend to get diminishing returns.
Now, to be honest, I was kind of struggling making this video. This past month has been great. The course has sold really well. The feedback has been awesome. And the top athletes in the world are basically doing what I'm advocating for in the course. So I'm very happy with the way things have turned out, and I'm grateful to be in this position.
Like, comment, subscribe, join this rocket ship. We want you.
But with that comes the pressure of me putting out groundbreaking videos every week. And in this video, I feel like I was kind of feeling that pressure a bit on the tail end of a successful month. But I knew I wanted to talk about leg locks in this video because Nilo in the pineapple shorts did something really cool. So shout out to him for inspiring this video. And we're going to connect that with Nicky Rod's heel hook attempt against Felipe Pena. So I hope you all will take away some valuable leg locking tips from this video while having some fun with the boys over at Bob Does Sports.
Just smash the living shit out of that subscribe button. Let's get dancing.
Now, if you've seen my leg lock for dummies series, this is going to be review for you. But I just wanted to quickly go over the responsibilities of our inside leg and outside leg. So from a straight Ashi we often start in a position where our opponent's knee is relatively in line with their hip and ankle. And it's the responsibility of our outside leg to bring their knee inside the line of their hip and ankle, which creates heel exposure. And then when it comes time to go into our finishing mechanics, it's the responsibility of our inside leg to bring their knee outside of their hip and ankle to get the break. And from a cross Ashi, it's the exact opposite. Our inside leg brings their knee to the outside of their hip and ankle to create heel exposure, and our outside leg is responsible for the finishing pressure by bringing their knee to the inside of their hip and ankle, which is why belly down inside heel hooks are ridiculously strong. Because as you can see, we can use gravity to really help us bring their knee inside the line of their hip and foot. Shout out belly down inside heel hooks.
Bruh. It was a belly down inside heel hook, bear in mind, and he just ate it. But afterwards he's just smiling at me like an Aztec mask, bro. It's just like, but yeah, it was like it wasn't.
So now just understanding that basic idea. If someone tells you, hey, if you're in 50-50, it's a good idea to probably cross your feet. However, if someone has you in inside Senkaku, it's probably not a good idea to cross your feet. Now, I could see how this can be very confusing, but if we look at it from the framework that we just went over, in my opinion, it makes it more simple. From 50-50, our opponent has a very strong inside leg. So they're able to easily create a situation where our knee is on the outside of our hip and foot. So crossing your feet is probably a good idea to help prevent heel exposure. However, from inside Senkaku, our opponent's inside leg is relatively weak, and we can deny heel exposure by turning our knee to the inside of our hip and foot and using our secondary leg in other ways to help facilitate our escape. Again, I think our training methods just focus so much on giving people the answers as opposed to giving people understanding. It's the give someone a fish versus teach someone to fish mentality. And what I'm trying to do here on this channel is teach you how to fish. So let's break down that time where Lachlan Giles almost heel hooked Gordon Ryan. So we start in a 50-50 situation and Gordon has his feet crossed. But Lachlan has his elbow in a great position to separate Gordon's feet and is able to get immediate heel exposure. And in order to apply finishing mechanics with an inside heel hook, we want to create a situation where the knee is inside the line of the hip and toe. And a good way to do that is by using your outside leg and bridge to get strong finishing mechanics. But Gordon is controlling that outside leg. So even though Lachlan has heel exposure, Gordon is able to prevent him from going into strong finishing mechanics and buys himself enough time to slip his toes, cross his feet, and get back to safety. And the whole time just as cool as a cucumber.
This guy, unfucking believable.
So let's say now we're on offense and we sit to a Narimi Ashigarami and we throw in our reap to attack an outside heel hook. But our opponent's able to spin much faster than we were expecting. So we let them spin right into our inside Senkaku and ideally we're able to expose the heel and get the finish. but most of the time they're going to do a good job of bringing their knee inside of their hip and ankle to prevent the heel exposure, and then pummel their second foot inside to help free them from our entanglement. So to deal with this resistance, or any resistance really, we have two options. We can stay in inside Senkaku and work to sharpen our sword, or we can switch to another position and use a different tool in the bag. Now John says once you reach a sufficient level, you start to see diminishing returns if you continue to focus your attention on fine-tuning your technique. And once you're at a sufficient level, you're probably better off focusing on the integration of tools. So ask yourself, is your inside Senkaku at a sufficient level?
The answer is probably no.
So let's spend some time getting it there. Now it's not always possible, but ideally we'd like to control the secondary leg and get to double trouble. And from there, if we can bring the secondary leg to the other side of our body, it can make it very difficult for our opponent to prevent heel exposure, and it can lead to a very nice and controlled finish. But if you're having trouble bringing the secondary leg across your body, maybe you can take a page out of Jordan Hawley's book and start to work belly down from inside Senkaku, where you initially hug with your heel hooking arm before handing it off to your non-heel hooking arm, freeing up your attacking arm to uncross their feet and expose their heel. And if their heel happens to slip, that's fine, just be sure to control their secondary leg on the roll through. And from here, you can shoot your knee through and back heel both legs very aggressively, making it difficult for your opponent to hide their heel as you go in for the finish. But then maybe you start trying to mess with how this connects with other positions like crisscross Ashi, and you thread your bottom leg underneath your top leg, and you can still punch your top knee through and achieve that same back heel effect for a strong, controlled finish. Now, if you happen to enter into inside Senkaku with the standard foot configuration, and as your opponent rolls, you transfer to crisscross Ashi, but your bottom foot ends up above your top leg instead of underneath it, don't worry about it. Just make sure that when the ref resets you, you switch your foot position.
You didn't see anything.
Or maybe you've seen the man himself, Placido, showing to put your bottom leg over your top leg to control the far hip, which is great. But I think the big takeaway from this sequence here is that when your opponent is trying to pummel in their secondary leg, you can use it as an opportunity to upgrade your foot position. Now this clip right here honestly inspired this whole video, because after I saw it, I knew I wanted to talk about leg locks. Recently, we talked about the idea of skimming the leg, where from an outside heel hook, when our opponent goes to roll, we can use our non-reaping leg to skim down our opponent's secondary leg and trap it, so they can no longer use that leg to push off of us and free their knee. Now from inside Senkaku, it's no secret that our opponent wants to turn in this direction to hide their heel and free their secondary leg so they can use it to push off of us and free themselves from our entanglement. So knowing this, we can make it difficult for our opponent to turn in the direction to hide their heel by taking this grip here, which is a great option, especially if we can't get a hold of their secondary leg and achieve double trouble. Now this grip can control someone relatively well, but you can fully expect them to start to pummel their legs. Now if they were able to turn on their side, it would make the foot pummel much easier. But because we have this grip on their foot, it prevents them from turning to this hip, and it forces them to do the foot pummeling sitting flat on their butt. And when your opponent tries to go into that predictable foot pummel from a vertical position, you can skim the leg with your top leg and trap their secondary foot. Now if you happen to kick them in the face on the way by, I would say in a tournament, that's a bonus. But I just thought that that was beautifully done and something that I'd never seen before. So shout out Nilo and the pineapple shorts. Now when we have this grip, our opponent doesn't have to stay flat on their butt. They can turn to their other hip and try and pummel their legs. And in this situation, Gordon stays strong with his top leg, but begins to pummel his bottom leg. And it results in him trapping Nicky's secondary leg with his bottom leg. So either way, the response from our opponent is going to be very predictable. They're going to try and pummel their foot. And if they're more square, I like the idea of bringing our bottom foot through into a crisscross Ashi type scenario before using our top leg to skim their leg and trap it. And if they fall to their other hip trying to pummel their leg, keep your top leg strong and use your bottom leg to try and trap their secondary leg. And because Gordon maintained a strong outside leg, it makes sense for him to transfer from a cross Ashigurami to a straight Ashigurami. Because with that strong outside leg, it's going to be very hard for Nicky to deny heel exposure. Now, if you want to know how I go about watching instructional content and basically the process I went through to create my course, be sure to download the free PDF in the description below. And I'm currently applying this process to my study of leg locks. Now, I think a good question at this point would be, where do straight ankle locks fit into this picture? And according to Mikey Musumeci, in order to apply a good straight ankle lock, you need to have your inside knee pointed the same direction as their knee, which will allow you to apply significant pressure. And as they run from that pressure, they can do so by bringing their knee up, which will allow you to create heel exposure. Or they can run by bringing their knee down towards the mat, creating a situation where their knee is well outside the line of their hip and ankle, which will allow you to switch to an Aoki lock. So if we take this knowledge and apply it to a position like outside Ashi, which has a bad reputation because you really don't have any form of diagonal control. Both your legs, your arms, everything is on one side of their body, which means you're giving your opponent a lot of back exposure. And also with your feet on the outside, you are vulnerable to getting counter leg locked. Here we see it happening from outside Ashi. But it can also happen from 50-50. Or you can initially pummel in your foot to keep it safe. But that can change very quickly, and if it does end up on the outside, you can find yourself in a leg lock shootout with an Irishman. So it does seem like a very risky attacking position. However, if someone wants to capitalize on our back exposure, they have to bring their knee outside the line of their hip and ankle. So knowing this, if we go to outside Ashi and someone is trying to take our back, we know that their knee is going to be outside the line of their hip and ankle, which means it's a great opportunity for us to use an Aoki lock. And you can see the harder the top player tries to take the back, the more their heel slips in for that Aoki lock. And as soon as it does, the finish comes on strong. So the question is outside Ashi a good position to attack from? Well, we do see people almost getting their back taken from outside Ashi, but then finishing the match. And we saw Nicky Rod apply a very strong outside heel hook from outside Ashi. And in order to apply the finishing mechanics of an outside heel hook, Nicky Rod wants to create a situation where Felipe's knee is outside the line of his hip and ankle. And in order to take the back, Felipe also wants his knee outside the line of the hip and ankle. So if Felipe Pena tries to take advantage of the back exposure at this point, he's probably going to break his own leg. So he's forced to turn in the other direction and start to fight with his foot. However, if your opponent is able to slip their toes out of your heel hook, this will put their foot above your shoulder. Or if the entry requires you to take a scoop grip, which means you'll enter into outside Ashi with the foot above your shoulder, which means now you have no ability to threaten that Aoki lock or outside heel hook. And especially if they're standing, your opponent is going to explosively work towards your back. So I think outside Ashi is a position that people, especially recently, have been using very effectively. However, it's one that requires you to be very precise with your gripping. And by precise, I mean that there should be consequences if your opponent wants to bring their knee to the outside of their hip and ankle. And two good ways to do that are through the use of an outside heel hook or an Achilles grip that is ready to transfer to an Aoki. Now, these are two great ways to deal with that resistance while staying in the same outside Ashi position. So basically, you're sharpening the saw. But please remember that when you're solving a problem, you also have the option of transferring to another position. So if you find yourself in inside Senkaku and your opponent is doing a good job of bringing their knee inside their hip and ankle, making it hard for you to expose the heel, you can try to use tricks from inside Senkaku to get the finish. But according to Danaher, you're gonna see diminishing returns if you take this approach. And it might be easier for you to just transfer to a straight Ashigarami, where now their resistance of bringing the knee inside the hip and ankle gives you heel exposure. So that's the biggest message that I wanted to get across in this video, and hopefully it helps you become a better problem solver. I also wanted to get across the point that my course is now available for sale. So if you found my content to be helpful, especially on guard passing, and you're looking to take the next step, the course is the way to go. And I think that will be clear after you read the free PDF down below, which outlines pretty much the process that I went through to create the course. Thank you all for the support. Leave a fist bump in the comment section if you haven't already, and we'll see you in the next one.